All right, wonderful, very exciting, and lovely to be here with everyone and to get an opportunity to share this message with you. What I want to talk about is actually, I can't actually, I'm at Nikki's computer, so everything's very confusing. Is my camera on? Can you see me? Ah, you can. Fantastic. Okay. Because what I wanted to do is talk about these shoes, something we all seem to have many of. There's a pair of these are actually my trail running shoes. So those are for trail running. Um, I don't have very fancy shoes, but these are about my fanciest I've got. So those are my fancy shoes. And then I've got obviously everyday sort of slip slops and many other pairs. And I think if we had to all look in our cupboards, we would see that we have many, many pairs of shoes. I mean, the shoe industry is a big industry. We all have shoes, and I bet you, if you look at your feet at the moment, I'm going to be almost 100% certain that every one of you is probably wearing shoes, even though you're inside or wherever you are. We have shoes. It's a big thing, and it's become a big industry, and the sports industry makes a lot of money out of them. But I think there's an interesting lesson we can learn from shoes. And the very first time that shoes are mentioned, and we know the power of firsts. When something appears the first time in the Bible, there's always something important to be learned from it. And so it's worth looking at it. And the first time that we come across shoes is actually in Exodus chapter 3. And it's the famous occasion where Moses stumbles upon this bush that's burning and he's very intrigued and he goes up closer. Then in Exodus 3, verse 5, God says, "Take off your sandals, from the place where you are standing is holy ground." And so Moses is wearing these sandals, so he would have had similar to my little things, or probably more like my Birkenstocks, wherever they've gone. But anyway, he's got his little slip slops on, or whatever types of shoes he had, and God tells him he must take them off. And I think there is potentially many, but two fundamental lessons I think I want us to draw from this, and I think are quite important. Why do we have shoes? Well, besides the obvious for many fashion statement, and that's what's made it a huge industry, is they protect our feet. If you don't have shoes and you walk on anything that's vaguely stony or whatever, most of us have got such little soft, flabby feet now that it's very uncomfortable. And just walking a short distance, on a gravel road or on a few stones is not an easy thing to do without shoes. There's only poking and and there's thorns and it's a terrible thing. So we just put shoes on. And I know as kids, most of our kids, for a long time would never wear shoes, and I try not wear them too often anyway now. But still we tend to wear them because they protect us. And I think there's some important lessons here. But the first lesson I want to draw is that Moses arrives at this place, and he's just a shepherd. He's doing his shepherding thing. There's a couple of sheep around. He's sorting them out, and he comes across, and then suddenly he ends up, there's this fire and there's a tree, and he suddenly discovers he's in the presence of God, and he has to remove his shoes. And I think the first lesson, the little brief lesson I want to look at, is that we have an everywhere God. We can sometimes forget that. We can sometimes think that God is bound to time. We're in our virtual church service now. He's bound to this time, or he's bound to a space, but he's an everywhere God. And I mean, David puts it beautifully in the Psalm: "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light becomes night around me, and the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for the darkness is light to you." So God is everywhere. We can't put him in boxes, in places, in churches, in times, or in books, or in symbols. And that's what Moses realizes. He's doing his normal shepherding things, and all of a sudden he realizes he is in the presence of God. And I think the important thing is that God often is found in our journey where we least expect him. And maybe we are just busy with work, like Moses was, or we're walking in the desert, or we're in the middle of a busy dinner party, and we find God. And I'm sure you all know the story of Mary and Martha, and Jesus as we read in Luke 10, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, they came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. It's a beautiful story. And so, I mean, what an opportunity. Imagine, here comes Jesus. He arrives at your place and he's coming to your house. And so, what are you going to do? So, Martha had a sister called Mary. And what's Mary doing? She sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he had to say. But Martha was distracted, and understandably, by all the preparations that had to be made. I mean, this is Jesus, and he's come with his entourage and disciples, and so she's trying to get meals and food ready. And so Martha says to Jesus, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. And then Jesus gives this most profound answer. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you're worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. Indeed, only one. And Mary has chosen that which is better and will not be taken from her. And so here we have the situation where in the middle of the busyness, just like with Moses in the middle of his busy day, all of a sudden there is this God moment where you realize that you're in the presence of divine. She's in the presence of Jesus. And there's the two responses. The one is to carry on looking after the sheep, or carry on preparing the meal, or carry on with what we're doing, or you stop and pause. And where is Mary? Notice where Mary is. She's at the feet of Jesus. She's at the feet of Jesus, the connection point. She is there at his feet. That's where she finds him. There is no division from where she is and he is. And what she is doing, Jesus says, is the right thing and will not be taken from her. And so I think the first thing we need to remember is God is everywhere. And we need to understand that there may be times, doesn't matter how busy we are, what's happening in our life, that we do need to pause and realize that we need to connect with him in a very real way. But the thing I really want to focus on is something else that removing of shoes tells us. Now, as I said earlier, when you wear shoes, you have a protection. So when I wear my little slip slops, I have a protection when I walk, because even though they're not super amazing, but they're good enough to protect generally some thorns and things going through them. However, if I right now, you're going to get a demo just so you can see. No shoes. Yep, I'm just told you no shoes, no shoes. If you really want to participate in this talk, you should take your shoes off at this point, because by the end of this, you'll see why. You see, shoes insulate us from the things that could hurt us. Shoes insulate us not only from things that can hurt us, they insulate us from feeling. They insulate. So if you're on a beach and you take off your shoes, it's going to be a totally different experience walking with shoes on or walking barefoot. Shoes, protect us. They make us feel comfortable. And by doing that, we start to disconnect with the things around us. And we do this increasingly in life. We have air conditions, and we in our cars and our homes, we dress certain ways, we cover ourselves up. And yeah, I understand that at a natural level. But what's the spiritual lesson here? That when we put these shoes on, remember the first occasion that we meet shoes in the Bible, Moses is told to take them off. And so shoes, in a way, represent something that separates or insulates us from truly experiencing God. I mean, it's almost like, I don't know if you've ever gone and had a shower and you put a raincoat on. I mean, you would feel the water hitting on the raincoat, but you wouldn't feel the rain. And understandably, we wear a raincoat when we go outside because we don't want the water, but it insulates us and we're not having the full experience. So there seems to be a lesson that God is saying, when you come into my presence, I want you to remove the thing that separates you from me. I want you to remove the thing that insulates you from really experiencing me. Remove the shoes. And so what are the shoes that we've got to remove? What are we talking about? Well, what were Martha's shoes? Martha's shoes was her work. Jesus said, you know what's separating you? You know what the shoes you've got in your feet is your busyness. Your busyness. And a lot of us can do that. We can think that in our busyness, we will get close to God. Well, if that were the case, I'll tell you what, the Jews and the Pharisees were masters at this. They had, I mean, we've got no comparison. They had all these feasts and rituals that they had to go through. They were busy all the time. But they were insulated from God. They were separated. Their busyness separated them from God. What about the story of the yuppie guy? What was the yuppie guy's shoes? Well, we meet him in Mark chapter 10. Teacher, he said to Jesus, all the laws I've kept since I was a boy. And Jesus looked at him and loved him. Amazing. One thing, he says, you lack. Interesting, one thing again. One thing is needful, said to Mary. One thing you lack. Go and sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. At this, the man's face fell, and he went away sad because he had great wealth. What were his shoes? No, his shoes was his wallet. His shoes was his money. That was his problem. He was tied up in all of that. The Pharisees, what were their shoes? No, the Pharisees' shoes were all their religious traditions. Woe to you, Pharisees, in Luke 11, verse 42, Jesus says, because you give a tenth of your mint and rue and all other kinds of garden herbs, doing these incredible things, but you neglect justice and the love of God. You should have practiced the latter without leaving the former undone. The Pharisees had shoes. It was their religious tradition. Our shoes can be so many things. Our shoes can be our jobs. We're so committed to our work. Our shoes can be our worries. Our shoes can even be our religion. Our shoes could be maybe social media. Our shoes could be our pride. It's a long list of things that can be our shoes, the things that can separate us from God. Each of us individually needs to look at our lives and think, when I come into the presence of God, when I see him, when I hear him speak to me, what's separating me from truly experiencing? Because Moses couldn't go forward if he still had his shoes on. He had to remove them to truly come into the presence of God, to have the full experience. And so what are the things in our lives that are hindering us? We need to get rid of whatever separates us from God. And it's hard to see, I think, in many ways, and until maybe we have the burning bush experience or the reality check when Jesus says, Mary has chosen what is better and will not be taken from her. You know, we all like to associate with Mary, but I think we're more the rich yuppie, or we're more Martha, or we're more the Pharisees. And so we need to try and reflect on our lives. What would it be that Jesus would point to and say, that's the thing that's separating you from truly experiencing me? We know the passage in Hebrews 12 where it says, therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let's throw off everything that hinders us. You know, there are these things that not only stop us from running, but they stop us from experiencing God. And so Jesus is not about shows of piety or cloaks of success or shoes of pride. What does Jesus want? He meets Mary at his feet. He wants authentic relationship. What does God want? He wants us touching the ground. He wants us feeling and experiencing his holiness wherever we go. Just like if you had to walk outside and on the grass, you would feel the texture. If you then had to walk on the beach sand, you'd feel the texture. If you walked on your carpet, you'd feel the texture. Each of those are different experiences if you have no shoes on, but are almost the same experience if you have shoes on your feet. So God is saying, there are going to be different textures in your life. There are going to be different spaces in your life. But I want you to feel me in those spaces. I don't want you to be insulated. And so the invitation is to walk barefoot with Jesus. And think about that for a while. We're invited to walk barefoot with Jesus. And think, oh no, Craig, I don't think that's a great idea. There could be thorns. There could be stony bits. And I know, you walk. I just walk outside here where we at the moment. There's lots of bushy area, and I'm not keen to walk barefoot in that area because there probably are pokey things. But yes, there are thorns in our lives, and there are stony bits. There are sandy bits and soft bits and carpeted bits. But God calls us to a real experience. He calls us to an experience that is authentic. He calls us to an authentic and grounded relationship with us. And this is the great challenge. This is the great calling, discovering authenticity in worship, discovering authenticity in relationship. It's being barefoot and feeling it. And then we really start to experience it, because if I'm barefoot and I'm walking across the open felt and it's poking me, wow, I'm going to probably have to very quickly maybe do something about it and maybe ask someone to help me. Well, that's what God wants. That's what Lord Jesus wants. He wants to be there to help us. If we have an authentic relationship and when things aren't going well, who are we going to turn to? Him. We try and insulate ourselves. We say, you know what, I've got insurance and that will protect me. Or I've got money in the bank. That's my shoes that will protect me. Or I've got burglar guards on my windows or whatever it may be. We put in all of these things that we think, well, they will insulate me and they will protect me. And there's often a good reason for them. But is there a risk that those things at some level also insulate us from really experiencing God? And I'm not saying now we go out and throw away every sort of thing that you have in your life, but we do need to look at our lives and see what are the things that do prevent us from having an authentic relationship in our lives with God. And as I said earlier, we need to wait for the moment when Jesus says, Martha, Martha. What's our Martha, Martha? It could be I'm too involved in a sport, or I'm too committed to social media, or I'm too obsessed with, making money in my career, or I'm even too obsessed with the Bible. And you think, no, you can't be too obsessed with the Bible. But we could. The Pharisees were masters of the law, because all of those things, if they don't bring us, and Jesus even said that, you search the scriptures, but you fail to see that there in the scriptures that speak of me, and they must bring you to me. You see, all of these things should bring us to the feet of Jesus. And so, whatever our shoes are, if they don't bring us to the feet of Jesus, it's a problem. And so, we're called to this great challenge to walk barefoot with Jesus. And it's emphasized in the very final act of Jesus, his very final act of service before the cross. We talk about first and last. And so, the first time we find shoes, we have Moses being told to remove them. Well, the last time Jesus is going to do something incredible, his final act of service, what does he do in John 13? And so Jesus got up, this is the Passover, from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, poured water into a basin, and then he began to wash the disciples' shoes. No, not their shoes, the disciples' feet. They had to remove their shoes in order for him to wash their feet. And so right at the end, we see Jesus connecting with them in this very real way. He's taken off their shoes and he's washing their feet. It's the place where Mary would meet him. It's the place where the disciples would have this most intimate relationship. And if you ever had someone wash your feet, it is a bit of a, well, it's like, what are you doing? We're not used to that in our Western culture, but that's where the connection happens. The feeling of Jesus, authentic, real, and uncovered. And then shortly after this, what happens? Well, Jesus is on the cross and his feet, barefoot, have been nailed to the cross. Those feet that have walked the most authentic path possible, the most authentic, closest relationship with God ever. Humans come along and think we'll try and nail them to the cross. Oh, well, there's no way that could ever happen, because there is no way of stopping the authentic and close relationship between Jesus and his Father. And then what happens immediately after that? Well, Jesus dies and he's raised. And the first person that Jesus meets after he's immortal, what happens? What's the first thing Mary does when she meets Jesus? Matthew 28. So the woman hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and they ran to tell the disciples. And suddenly Jesus met them. Greetings, he said. And they came to him and clasped his feet and worshipped him. That's where the relationship is found. And of course, it's a posture of humility, but it's also this connection point. There is nothing that stops us from being in the presence of Jesus. And so it's his feet that they touch, the place of connection. And once more, it's at his feet that the divine connection is found. It's not just humility, it's the touch, the connection, the authenticity. And so as we come now and we ponder our lives, as we look at Jesus, the one whose feet were nailed, who then burst out of the grave, the one whose at feet Mary fell down to touch and connect, we need to consider our own lives and how can I walk barefoot with Jesus? How can I experience a real relationship with him? not one that's insulated, not one that's covered over with trappings. What is stopping me from being at his feet and truly experiencing him in every single space of my life? How can I experience the everywhere God in an authentic way? Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Amen.